The first Shakespeare play I ever encountered was Midsummer Night's Dream when I was about 14 years old. The English teacher marched into the classroom and dumped copies of the play on each desk, but instead of reading it, he performed the play for us. He was a bit of a ham actor, so he'd march up and down the aisles, acting all the roles, but describing the sets, the costumes, the pratfalls. He performed the play for us, and that was a revelation. I thought this is for me. So it was only a few months after that I declared I'm going to be an actor now and do Shakespeare for the rest of my life. Well, it's very hard to decide on a favourite. You tend to love the one you're in at the moment or working on or producing. You just fall totally in love with that play. And some mean more to you at certain times of life than others. But I'd say, being as objective as I can, that I think King Lear is the greatest because it's the most uncompromising, the bravest. It goes further than anybody else has ever gone in looking into the abyss of the human condition in an extraordinary way. And I think nobody else has ever come anywhere near that in terms of theatre. I think to the uninitiated, A Midsummer Night's Dream is a good place to start, especially if you see it in performance rather than just read it out of a textbook, especially at school. If you can see it performed, I think because it's got so many elements that appeal to an audience, and a young audience. It has the buffoonery and the slapstick of the mechanicals. It's got the rom-com of the four young lovers cheating on each other all over the place. And it's got the magic of the fairyland and the most exquisite poetry. Too often the play's reduced to just slapstick and buffoonery, but in fact those three elements all have to coexist, and if you get them all right, it turns out like a Mozart opera. It's exquisite and beautifully balanced, and I think a very, very satisfying piece of theatre to see. I think the one that the kids respond to most immediately is Romeo and Juliet, for very obvious reasons. It's all about them. It's harder for a teenager to get involved with the 12th century Thanes of Scotland or the medieval world of Richard III. But Romeo and Juliet is timeless. It's about kids, and it's all about forbidden love, things your parents tell you not to do. You mustn't love that boy, therefore, inevitably you do. So it's about teenage rebellion as well as teenagers being smitten, and I think they respond to that. I think in terms of the general public who don't get to see these plays very often, the most underrated ones would be Measure for Measure and Troilus and Cressida. They're not underestimated by academics and scholars who really appreciate their complexity and boldness, but to a general public who don't get to see them very often, they are mysterious. They're so bleak and negative in a way and savage that it's quite hard to respond to unless you know something about Shakespeare's intention in writing them. Why do Shakespeare's plays deserve great book status? Some commentators, the gloomiest ones, tell us that in 1,000 years' time we'll have destroyed the planet, either through nuclear war or mucking around with the ecology, etc. So if you imagine an alien in a spaceship landing here and finding a devastated planet, and just 3 or 4 people huddled in a cave somewhere, and he says to them, what was humanity like? What were human beings like? And they had it in a book of Shakespeare and said it's all in there. Everything that human beings ever suffered, or the joy, the misery, the hopes, the despair, the beauty, the horror, it's all in those pages. And nobody else has ever had that range of experience and range of comment about the human condition. You tend to like the ones you see when you're very young, I think. When you're very young and you see Shakespeare for the first time, they're the ones that really knock you over. And as you get older and more jaded and you see more and more performances, you get harder to impress. So when I was very young, I saw Laurence Olivier's movies, which really blew me away. I thought that was as great as you could get. When I went to England and worked with the Royal Shakespeare Company, I worked with Paul Schofield, who became my number one favourite. But in that company were also people like Judi Dench and Helen Mirren and Ian Richardson, Ian Holm, a whole bunch of wonderful actors. And that to me was where I learnt the most, from watching those actors night after night performing. I can't go into Shakespeare's famous quotes because there are so many thousands and they just leap out at you, and if you take them out of context they become a bit like Christmas cracker mottos, but certain lines do impinge on one and mean something more than their immediate content. For instance, there's a line in The Tempest, when I played Prospero 3 times now, and I always got a bit of a frisson from saying, "This thing of darkness I acknowledge mine." He's talking about Caliban, but the line goes deeper than that. It's a kind of admission of all our darker side and all the things that we don't like to admit to. And I often find that comes up in my subconscious, and I think, yeah, this thing of darkness I acknowledge mine.